We begin tonight with a major economic loss for our region. General Motors is stopping production of the Bright Drop delivery van at the Kami assembly plant in Ingersoll, a decision with major implications for the community and the wider manufacturing industry.
General Motors is dropping electric van production at its plants near London, Ontario. The automaker says decreased demand has pushed it to stop making the Bright Drop electric delivery van.
Something significant has unfolded in Ontario, and its effects are radiating far beyond a single community. The shift has unsettled automakers, policymakers, and workers across North America because it challenges long-held assumptions about how the next decade of transportation will be built. The shutdown of GM's Bright Drop production was more than a corporate announcement. It became a moment that forced the entire industry to confront how fragile the future of electric mobility can be. When global markets, government pressure, and shifting consumer demand collide, the chain reaction exposes complications few expected, which is why this story has held international attention. General Motors confirmed that its Bright Drop electric vans will no longer be produced at the Kami assembly plant in Ingersoll, a factory once promoted as a flagship for Canada's electric future. The announcement was delivered directly to workers, many of whom had supported the project from its earliest planning stages because they believed the site would anchor a long era of stable, green manufacturing. When Bright Drop was introduced in 2021, it was framed as a key element of GM's all-electric transition. Public officials stood beside company leaders and described the initiative as proof that Canada was ready to lead a new generation of clean mobility. That confidence convinced both Ottawa and Ontario to invest heavily in the facility, providing nearly $1 billion in combined funding to retool the plant and prepare it for full-scale EV production. The initial promise appeared enormous. Bright Drop was expected to generate thousands of long-term jobs, transform the region into a competitive counterweight to Detroit, and demonstrate that clean industry could grow on Canadian soil without being overtaken by foreign competition. For a time, that vision looked within reach. The factory operated with strong momentum, and political leaders frequently cited it as an example of how industrial renewal could succeed in a rapidly changing global landscape. But the early optimism faded as sales of the electric vans failed to expand. Demand never reached the levels GM required to make the operation profitable, and internal assessments showed that each vehicle produced in Ingersoll cost more to build than the company earned from selling it. By early 2025, GM had reached an unavoidable conclusion. Continuing production no longer made financial sense. More than 2,200 workers suddenly faced uncertainty, and nearly half were already out of work by the time the company's official announcement became public. Assembly lines that had once moved with steady precision now sat silent, and the energy that had defined the launch period drained out of the building. Union leaders from Unifor spoke candidly about what they believed were the root causes. They pointed directly to Washington's trade policies and emphasized how difficult it had become to move Canadian-made vehicles into the American market. President Donald Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian EV imports fundamentally reshaped the economics of the project. According to union officials, the policy created conditions no factory could endure without incurring heavy losses. Slow sales mattered, but the tariffs pushed the entire operation past its breaking point. In the union's view, politics played a bigger role in the plant's disruption than performance ever did. Industry analysts reached similar conclusions. They explained that every EV shipped across the border forced GM to absorb substantial margin losses. Under that level of pressure, even a carefully planned electric program could not remain viable. What complicated the narrative was the speculation circulating quietly inside government offices. Some insiders argued that the shutdown might not represent a collapse, but a strategic pause, one that could give Canada time to rebuild a stronger, more independent EV supply chain. That possibility raised a larger question about whether the turmoil in Ingersoll marks the beginning of a broader industrial shift rather than the end of one. Clarity began to emerge as the fallout inside the United States reached the public record. The same tariffs intended to protect American workers created predictable problems for American manufacturers. GM disclosed that Trump's trade policies had already removed more than $1 billion from the company's earnings. In one quarter alone, core profit fell by 32%. The rapid losses erased gains produced by strong vehicle sales early in the year and forced GM to withdraw its financial outlook entirely because executives could no longer anticipate how the trade environment would evolve. Suppliers across the United States found themselves struggling to adapt. Some slowed production, while others prepared contingency plans because fluctuating demand made forecasting nearly impossible. Industry studies revealed that GM, Ford, and Stellantis were collectively facing up to $42 billion in additional annual costs. The scale of the disruption was extraordinary, yet the most unusual twist was that those added expenses did not translate into stable American jobs. Plants that had been preparing to hire more workers suddenly froze their recruitment plans. Factories paused shifts or reduced working hours as costs outpaced revenue, illustrating how a policy designed to strengthen domestic employment had instead produced widespread instability across the North American automotive landscape. Even major labor unions in the United States began raising questions about who truly benefited from the trade policies that triggered so much turmoil across the automotive sector. When the suspension of production in Ingersoll took effect, the shock did not stop at the factory gates. It spread across the Great Lakes region, where Canadian suppliers that provided essential components for BrightDrop suddenly lost contracts with no warning. Millions of dollars in orders disappeared almost overnight, and by the end of the year, the transportation sector had recorded a nearly 20% drop in revenue. Companies that depended on the cross-border movement of parts struggled to reorganize their logistics. A once-integrated network that kept assembly lines running smoothly was suddenly disrupted by delays and bottlenecks that few had anticipated. In an effort to stabilize revenue, GM redirected part of its attention back toward gasoline-powered vehicles produced in the United States. That shift offered a temporary financial patch, but it also carried consequences for the electric vehicle market. Growth slowed far below earlier projections, and unsold commercial electric vans began accumulating in storage facilities. Analysts warned a slowdown of that magnitude could influence the broader transition toward electrified transport, since commercial fleets typically drive early adoption. What happened in Ingersoll was no longer the problem of a single plant. It had become a signal that one policy shift was capable of disrupting an entire regional economy. While turmoil intensified across the border, Canada's response unfolded in an entirely different direction. Ottawa and Ontario approached the situation as a real-world test of the country's industrial strategy. Within days of GM's decision, both levels of government coordinated an emergency plan to prevent a deeper economic downturn. Programs were introduced for worker retraining, allowing employees affected by the shutdown to transition into other parts of the EV sector. Existing investments were reorganized to support domestic suppliers and stabilize companies vulnerable to cross-border volatility. As part of this recalibration, the government adjusted its relationship with major automakers by reducing duty-free import quotas for foreign-built vehicles. GM's quota dropped by more than 24%, and Stellantis saw a reduction of nearly 50%. These changes were designed to ensure that companies receiving public support maintained a baseline of production within Canada, minimizing the risk of a future scenario in which a single corporate decision could hollow out a local economy. At the same time, Ottawa restructured incentive programs so that firms benefiting from subsidies would be required to keep more of their value chain inside the country. This shift signaled that Canada intended to protect its long-term economic interests through consistency and strategic planning rather than reactive measures. Those moves created conditions that led to an unexpected outcome. Rather than waiting for the market to naturally rebound, Canada accelerated efforts to reinforce its EV ecosystem. Between 2020 and 2024, the country attracted more than $46 billion in EV-related investment. Government incentives totaling more than $52 billion played a major role, unlocking massive private sector commitments that reshaped the nation's industrial landscape. Large-scale projects began to take shape, positioning Canada as a central player in the North American EV supply chain. Honda announced a $15 billion advanced manufacturing complex in Ontario. Stellantis and LG Energy Solution moved forward with a $5 billion battery plant. Volkswagen committed $7 billion to its new PowerCo facility. GM and POSCO invested hundreds of millions into a cathode materials plant in Quebec. Each of these projects strengthened a different link in a domestic supply chain that had previously been fragmented. By October, roughly 75% of Canada's EV value chain was integrated within its own borders, giving the country a level of insulation from foreign trade swings that few would have predicted a decade earlier. The shift demonstrated how a crisis, when handled with discipline, could evolve into an opportunity to build long-term economic strength. Investors took notice and began viewing Canada as a stable location for future EV development. As Canada regained momentum, GM faced deeper challenges in the United States. Production costs in several American plants rose by nearly $2,400 per vehicle, squeezing profit margins across key electric models. 2 flagship EV programs were quietly postponed, while plants in Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio prepared for layoffs as production schedules were revised. Analysts caution that GM's decision to withdraw from Canada might leave the company trailing competitors that were expanding north of the border. Those competitors were moving with a different philosophy. Volkswagen identified long-term stability as a core advantage and placed confidence in Canada's integrated supply structure. Honda expanded its plans as well, recognizing that a predictable policy environment provided a strategic edge in an industry defined by enormous capital risk. These decisions strengthened Canada's position and highlighted a stark contrast between 2 industrial models. One relied on protectionist policies that fluctuated with each political cycle. The other depended on steady cooperation between government and industry. As the year progressed, that difference became increasingly visible. The situation surrounding the Cami plant offered an early illustration of this contrast. Ingersoll had once been celebrated as a symbol of the future of green manufacturing. Even after the shutdown, the site retained symbolic importance. It became a reminder of how vulnerable major industrial projects can be when economic pressures collide with political impulses. Analysts began describing Cami as a case study in why long-term industrial planning requires more than optimistic announcements or corporate enthusiasm. It depends on the stability of the environment surrounding the project. If that external landscape shifts too sharply or too often, even well-financed plans can fall into uncertainty. Canada's decision to anchor its EV strategy in long-term planning allowed the country to avoid the full severity of a downturn. Instead of retreating, it advanced its position, a rare outcome in a period marked by global volatility. International observers noted that Canada had begun shaping an identity as a reliable industrial partner. Clean energy capacity, political consistency, and targeted economic programs created momentum that encouraged new commitments from global manufacturers.